I know nearly everyone here. So hi for those I haven't met. Kia ora, koutou, and welcome. My name is Kate Wilson-Butler. I'm the Head of Climate Action here at SBC. And it is really wonderful to see so many familiar faces on the call. And thanks to you all for taking the time to be here. I know that these are really busy times, and in particular for those up in Tamaki Makaurau, Zoom fatigue is getting very real these days. So I really appreciate you prioritising this workshop. As you will probably know, this is one of a series of sectoral and thematic workshops we'll be running for SBC and CLC members to help shape our collective response into the ERP discussion document, or Emissions Reduction Plan discussion document, I should say. I'll bring up a brief outline of how we're going to run things today. We're going to keep things relatively simple to allow plenty of time for discussion. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great. So basically, I'll do a short opening here, and then I'll pass over to Karina, Commandant of Sapere, who many of you will know from her work on our low carbon freight pathway, the Climate Change Commission submission we did earlier in the year, as well as the submission to Ministry of Transport on its green paper as well back in June. So Karina will give a short presentation on where we've landed in the transport section of our first draft submission, and then we'll open it up for some discussion shaped around the three focus areas in the discussion document. We also have Toby Stevenson from Sapere on the call today as well. So hello, Toby, nice to see you again. As you would have seen from some of our SBC CLC early comment on the ERP discussion document when it first came out, and as you would have heard already as well if you've joined any of our earlier workshops, the ERP discussion document is not a draft plan. The policy it contains fall far short, by its own calculation, fall far short of meeting the emissions budgets the Climate Change Commission has recommended. So our mission at SBC being all about accelerating the transition to a zero carbon future, our focus is now on how we can develop concrete proposals that will achieve and enable meaningful emissions reductions and ideas that are readily translated into policy. And the idea being that at the front end of our submission, we will put key recommendations into a table and equate those with projected emissions reduction potential and also dollar figures that the government can factor into budget 2022. So make it as easy as possible for policymakers. Transport is one of those areas where we think more could be done to drive down emissions, particularly given the proportion of our emissions profile it represents. It's also happily the most developed section of the ERP discussion document, with the benefit of Ministry of Transport's previous work and all of the engagement it received on its green paper back in June. So there is a lot more detail for us to work with than in other parts of the ERP discussion document. And without further ado, I will actually just pass to Karina now to talk us through some of that detail and how we're thinking we might respond to it. So I'll stop screen sharing and pass over to Karina.
Thanks, Kate. Let me just share my screen. Kia ora, everyone, and welcome to this Friday afternoon session. So I'm just going to go through some slides that some of you may have seen. This is just going to be a refresher and also just for the benefit of those who weren't able to attend the previous two workshops. We'll start with the big picture. So this chart shows how emissions under current policies compare to the budgets being the black line and the emissions under current policies being in green. As you can see, the carbon budget 1 for 2025 can be met with current policies, and those include clean car package, RUC exemptions, changes in vehicle fleet profile and fuel efficiencies. But there's a big gap for the next two budgets. So to deal with that, the ERP sets a few targets. The targets are set across three focus areas. Focus area 1 is to reduce reliance on cars and support people to walk, cycle, and use public transport. The target is to reduce VKTs, vehicle kilometers traveled, by cars and light vehicles by 20% by 2035. Focus area number 2 is to rapidly adopt low emissions vehicles and fuels. And the target is to increase zero emission vehicles to 30% of the fleet by 2035. And number 3 is begin work now to decarbonize heavy transport and freight. Two targets are there: reduce emissions from freight transport by 25% by 2035, and reduce the emissions intensity of the fuel by 15% by 2035. So if those targets are achieved, then are met, then that will reduce emissions by 2035 by 41%. And this is in line with CCC's recommendation. So far, so what of engagement we have through the 2 workshops and the draft response that's been shared with you. As we see, response on target is you agree with the targets proposed for focus areas 1 and 2. They largely are in line with what CCC has said. But for 3, for freight emissions, you're proposing a much more ambitious target to halve freight emissions by 2030 and to be net zero by 2050. And that target just covers trucks, rail, and marine. That comes off the work that we have done. We have all done for the as part of the low emissions freight work. Now I'm going to go into actions. So focus area 1, things that you support. One is to, these are actually some recommendations that our SBC has made previously, and they have made it through the ERP discussion document, which is great to see. So these are integrated emissions assessment and land use planning and transport decisions, develop principles for a national public transport network, although this is a bit weak, and you'll see that what you recommend is actually to strengthen that action. To review the tax system to ensure low emissions options are not disadvantaged, and to introduce congestion pricing. What you're recommending, in addition to what you agree, the 2 key areas for focus area number 1. So one is the National Public Transport Network. There's a number of separate proposals that relate to this network, relating to active travel, making accessible urban design and efficient public transport. What you are saying is that all of these proposals actually need to be viewed holistically as part of a strategy. That strategy needs to be developed more urgently, not just have principles developed over the first carbon budget and then actions developed in subsequent budgets. You'd like to see the tax system review accelerated, more urgency to be placed on the potential for public transport, walking and cycling in rural and provincial areas, and the strategy to include things like adaptation requirements, an infrastructure plan with clear timelines, and mode shift plans with interregional travel. The other key recommendations relates to transport pricing system. This is not reflected at all in the discussion document at the moment. And this comes off your recommendations for the green paper back in June. You're recommending accelerating the development of a nationwide road pricing system, potentially as part of the Ministry of Transport's Future of the Revenue System project, and you'd like to specifically consider the feasibility of smart road pricing.
So I haven't been party to the previous discussions. I'm not sure what all that means. I'm not sure. I agree with it, I suppose, because I don't know what it means.
Would you like to, how about I go through these slides?
Just the transport pricing system. I understand the rest of it, but the transport pricing system, the addition of that.
So the idea is that there needs to be some sort of mechanism to collect funding for maintaining infrastructure and roads. Yeah. So if you've got RUC exemptions, yeah, you need to think about the other side of the coin, or well, where's the revenue going to come from to maintain infrastructure if you're exempting RUCs for low emissions vehicles? That's essentially a summary. And the smart road pricing, I'm not an expert in this, but from what I understand is the concept of pay as you drive. So that's how you collect money based on the travel that you make.
Yeah, which is what RUC is. So
I guess it's about how it's collected.
Yeah, I wouldn't be supportive of making further complications to a system which is already fairly established. RUC works pretty well. A lot of people are going to eRUC now. It's an established system. The exemptions are fairly limited in terms of scope, and I'm not sure if there's been some proposal to increase the exemptions for RUC for low emission vehicles, but certainly that was very limited in scope. And
there are proposals to extend them for electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So so is there an issue with that extension? Or
no, great if they're extending it, but I think that we've got a mechanism. Don't fix what's not, and it's a pretty sophisticated mechanism in many regards. It's fit for purpose exactly what you've written there. Why would we come up with a new way of funding roads when we've already got one that works and it's based on activity and weight and everything else, which is sensible.
So Graham, maybe we can pick this up again in the discussion, but just in terms of background, this point was made in the submission that we worked up and consulted with all members to the Ministry of Transport's Green Paper back in June. So if there is additional kind of nuance or there's some kind of gloss that we want to put on that in the context of the ERP discussion document, absolutely open to that conversation. So yeah, let's talk.
Is it an RUC exemption, or is it the money they're losing from the excise tax on fuel with zero emissions vehicles?
So it's, well,
because you have to replace the excise tax. I understand that because you're moving to a zero fuel model. But yeah, you're right, Grant. Replacing a pay-as-you-go system with a pay-as-you-go system makes no sense.
Is there anyone who can talk to this issue the way it was reflected in the submission? From any other, because since we're on this topic, let's just iron it out. Or is it something that I don't have the answer?
Yeah. Okay, so they have talked for years about removing road user charges for the light vehicle fleet.
Yeah.
But they still need it for heavy vehicle fleet because the argument is the heavy vehicles create the damage to the road.
So can I just summarize what we're saying is that RUC is fit for purpose. We need RUC to raise revenue.
Yep.
But we're not sure that smart road pricing needs to be, or it's timely to be considered as a replacement. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, why are we adding complexity? Because say they're going to do congestion charging or time-based charging or all of those other charging mechanisms. It's adding a lot of complexity and not necessarily a lot of benefit, especially if we should be focusing on the pathway to zero emission vehicles, which was electric and biodiesel and hydrogen. I just don't understand how this would be a priority and a recommendation. And so I don't understand. I'm not saying it's not.
Okay. Is there anyone, any of the members today who can speak to the issue of smart road pricing and how the recommendation came about?
I wasn't in the meeting where you discussed it, but my understanding is that the RUCs are here to stay. The RUCs will be changed on the basis of type of fuel used, but you've got to remember that RUCs now are not based on fuel, they're based on heavy vehicle damage to roads, repairs to infrastructure, fair share of costs, etc., to incentivize cleaner vehicles. The government has offered up an incentive where the RUCs will be exempt or semi-exempt up until 2024. What happens after that, nobody knows.
And I think the point is that the exemption that they've offered is limited in scope, and it's difficult to build a business case around it because there's also the trigger around once a certain percentage of vehicles are low emission, that will also cause the exemption to expire. So I think if you're looking at exemptions on RUC, it's a difficult one to.
Yeah, RUC exemptions are temporary; they're not long term. The smart road pricing is, and I wasn't in on the meeting. I'm sorry, but I would imagine they were discussing the likes of toll roads or superhighways, and that's the only thing I can add to that.
Hi, it's Rosie here.
Yeah, go on, Rosie.
Can you hear me there?
Yeah, go ahead, Rosie.
Yeah, so I think I wonder whether this was purely added in there in order to deal with, about 12 in that period of 12 months ago through to 24 months ago, there was a really big push to try and continue to use by some, not all people, not all parties, but to try and use that RUC exemption across all zero and low emission vehicles. And it was really clear from discussions with MOT that even they felt that it had erroneously been put in place, that it was the wrong lever to pull for the reason that they had, but it was simply done because it was a bucket of cash that was accessible, and it was the only way to access some way of incentivizing the battery electric vehicles at the time. And there was a pretty strong perspective from MOT that they weren't going to extend it or make those exemptions open to others. And so I think that when we were putting this together, and I don't remember the detail, but I think it was important to create a level playing field for the carbon intensity of vehicles, so that you didn't end up with battery electric getting access to those RUC exemptions and no other low emission vehicle type having it. So I don't think it was around trying to create a new system, but encouraging or supporting MOT to develop a system that supported low emission vehicles across the board, that didn't chew into the funding that's needed to repair due to heavy traffic, which is, what RUC was for. So I wonder whether that's why we've ended up with it worded like that.
Yeah, so can I just, I'm not 100% sure of the genesis of this. I think it tracks, there's probably a trail that can be tracked back through our previous submissions, because I know it was mentioned also in the submission we did to the Climate Change Commission. And we'll have to go back and figure out exactly where it came from and who made the point and how it evolved over time. I suppose the one thing I wanted to reflect on is to what extent we need to go into detail on this point in our response to the emissions reduction plan, because I was just looking in the discussion document itself, and it's the treatment of pricing is extremely high level. It's one bullet on a page which simply says that government will investigate how pricing can encourage mode shift and reduce emissions as part of MOT's review of the revenue system. So I think the real conversation is to be had in the context of that review of the revenue system process. We can certainly put a marker down here, but I don't know that this will be the place to have that detailed conversation necessarily.
And I'd much prefer to see the investment done on subsidising the price of hydrogen to get to the long run position, so early adopters aren't compromised or aren't disadvantaged. So I think that's where the opportunities are. We need to make sure RUC continues to be paid in some shape or form, but we've done a lot of modelling around hydrogen, trying to get it live now, and the cost of hydrogen is prohibitive. And if anyone's going to put some money somewhere, if you get hydrogen at $7 a kilogram now, would be cheaper than diesel, even with RUC. And that would probably where I'd be saying, look, and that's the kind of number people are talking about for the long run position on the cost of hydrogen per kilogram. If we can do that now, if we can support that now, that will make all these hydrogen trucks really gives you a model of what hydrogen would look like in the future state once they've got scale.
Sure. Yeah, and we can factor that into the response to it, Graham. I suggest that we might park that particular discussion because there's quite a lot to get through, and we can definitely pick it up in the Q&A if people want to go further on pricing.
Okay.
Sorry, just a last. Can I just conclude that, Graham? So, because we will be talking about how to do more focus area 3, but is it fit? So this is a new action. This is a new recommendation that is added by SBC, and it's not in the ERP, so we don't have to include it or respond to it if it's out of date or it's not relevant. But so what you're saying is to not remove funds for infrastructure maintenance at the expense of incentives for take up of low carbon fuel vehicles. Is that okay? We can write something up in the ERP and then you can respond to it. Cool.
Karina, I just see that we have a hand up. Jackson, did you have a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to add, I also wasn't here for the initial discussions of this point, but I mean, in my mind, there's quite a big dependence on fuel tax for publicly provided infrastructure and services. So I think this is more of just securing funding for future proofing, essentially, with more and more EVs and more fuel efficient vehicles entering New Zealand's fleet. That funding is going to dry up pretty quick as we use less petrol. So this is just a way to future proof government being able to invest in infrastructure like hydrogen, as was mentioned before. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Point. Thanks, Jackson. Great. Karina, back to you.
All right, moving on to focus area 2, so low emissions vehicles in the fleet. Actions that are consistent to what you've recommended before. There will be widening evidence gathering on drivers of mobility choices, introduce a vehicle scrappage scheme, set up a clean vehicle sector leadership group, which I think has already been done, produce a national EV infrastructure plan, and also propose a new policy, which is to introduce an individual maximum emissions per kilometer limit per imported vehicles. So that's per each individual car, which we ask you to respond to in the document. Because I don't think you've commented on that before, it's new. Right, so the key recommendations relate to one, the leadership group. So the way it's framed, it's as if the leadership group is mainly been set up to tackle the EV supply side issue, for example, through bulk procurement, and you're recommending to expand the group's mandate, for example, to develop a roadmap accelerating the transition of the fleet in a holistic way, such that things like availability, affordability, and safety are reflected, and also to consider charging infrastructure and incentives. So just to broaden the remit of the group. With regards to charging infrastructure,
Karina, can I just make a point on that recommendation, just to provide a bit of nuance there. I suppose when we were thinking about that, it was less about the group and more about the end point, which is how do we encourage policy development around the transition to, or transitioning the light fleet in a way that is holistic, right? That actually thinks about the full picture of supply side issues, charging infrastructure, affordability, safety, what incentives might work and what unintended consequences might arise from different kinds of incentives, how you ensure equity and accessibility, all of this stuff. And I suppose we are very open. Where we landed is you have an existing group, a leadership group that has been convened by the minister. Why not use that or modify it in a way that is actually able to deliver that kind of value? There might be other mechanisms for achieving that, but that is the idea that we somehow develop this roadmap in a holistic way. And I wondered if, maybe not necessarily now, but in the conversation, I know Louise, you're from Akina, you're sitting on that group, so you might have views about its ability to deliver something along those lines, but I did just want to provide that nuance on that particular recommendation.
Thanks for the context, Kate. So if there are no reactions to that, moving on to charging infrastructure. The specific additional recommendations from the group are to accelerate the scoping of the plan. I think it's the way it's framed, it's as if the actions are being developed later on in the budget or in the second one. It's to introduce a co-investment subsidy for EV charging infrastructure, so that to incentivize investment incentivize away investment of fossil fuel industry capex, and greater recognition linkages between the electricity and the transport sectors, for example, consideration of vehicle to grid technology, and potentially a moratorium or some other limitation on any new fossil fuel stations.
I think that fourth bullet point weakens the other ones. It's not needed. You're not seeing a whole lot of petrol stations opening up. I think the first two are great, but the moratorium to me is not we're not adding value to the conversation there. You're distracting from your other comments. I don't disagree with it, but I think if you're focusing your message, I'd have 3 points there that are really important.
Hi Karina, it's Robin here from Vector. Just another point that we would make on those is a need to include consideration to drive smart EV charging in particular, just to ensure that all the chargers that are installed are able to be connected with a digital platform for optimization in the future. So we know that that could potentially reduce network peak demand growth by 60%.
Wow. Yeah, that's really important.
It is really important. And the costs of retrofitting, once you've installed the passive chargers, the cost of retrofitting, potentially is quite prohibitive. So it's just an opportunity, a moment now for the government to just pull the right levers to ensure that enabling technology is in place.
Is there anyone, so have you developed this point a bit in the other submission that I can pick up from in terms of the policies you think might help with this?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, there's a number of things that you could do. I know some networks have been, lobbying quite strongly to regulate for smart EV charging installations. That's something that the UK has committed to doing. I know that incentives in the UK also were quite effective in driving uptake. It's really the outcome that's the most important thing, but the Climate Change Commission did recommend regulation for smart EV chargers. So we would support their recommendation and would also look to the UK and that they've regulated for it.
Cool, thank you. I will have a look, but if you've got anything to add to this,
I can see
specifics,
yeah,
that would be great. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Karina.
Right, so moving on to focus area 3, which is about freight. Actions that are consistent with your previous recommendations is to develop a freight and supply chain strategy in the first budget, introduce a biofuels mandate, to decarbonize trucks through fuel efficiency standards, more funding to be provided for low emissions truck purchase, investment in green fuel infrastructure and green freight procurement. For aviation is to investigate the feasibility of sustainable aviation fuels with a focus on domestic production, and to develop policies to support zero emissions aircraft. For marine, to investigate options to encourage coastal shipping, so around $35 to $40 million of investments allocated for that in the first budget. And also draw up a national plan to reduce maritime emissions and set targets for the shipping sector through low carbon fuels or shipping standards. And rail is to implement the New Zealand rail plan.
What does that mean? Because rail is really broken at the moment and it's going backwards.
Graham, so it's very high level, the discussion there. So I thought I would welcome your input on that, on your views on where rail is and what you can add us into more detail, what needs to be done. It's more reference just to the plan.
Yeah, if we look at what's happening in Rail at the moment, they've introduced track user charges and they're, a lot of indication that the pricing is now going to get more expensive than road, which is a massive disincentive. And we're drawing out plans now to move stuff from rail to road because we just can't afford it. And Fonterra have had similar experiences. They've told me that they can't get rail to match road pricing, which is, it's a problem. Rail should be cheaper than road. And, either we've got to put the price of road up or we've got to take the price of rail down. There is some significant disincentives to use rail at the moment.
Do you know why there are trends for the pricing to go up? Because it's been relatively high anyway compared to road.
Yeah, I think it's probably to do with Rail's mandate to become profitable. And, there's something happening there that's not working.
Okay, so perhaps we can frame it as a risk that, I don't know how this is framed in the plan, but we can say a risk that it might not, more shift through to rail might not happen at the pace.
I think we're seeing the reverse happening at the moment. People cheaper to get stuff on road to Christchurch than on rail, and it's faster and better service. And likewise, Palms North, it's currently cheaper, but it's not significantly cheaper. So I think from if I was king of the world, I could do whatever I wanted. I'd be having a train run every 3 hours from Auckland to Palms North to Christchurch, and it would be like a conveyor belt, and it would be, priced in a way that you'd be an idiot not to use it. And that's where you need to get to rail, and it's not doing 100 stops. It's kind of 3 major hubs would be my view of the world. Probably Auckland, Palms North, and Christchurch. With the exception of some special services such as inland ports, which makes sense because you don't have a road leg either side. But rail doesn't make sense at under about 4 hours of travel time, because your road leg to pick up and then your road leg to deliver, you're actually doing as many Ks and hours if it's less than 4 hours travel time for rail, I should say. So it's got to be, with a few exceptions like bulk supply or rail heads, inland ports, where it really makes sense to, where you don't have the road bridges, it really makes sense to only keep rail at like long haul spine function rather than these. And if road goes up, a lot, that's going to get people onto rail. But there's got to be a differential. There has to be probably a 20% price differential between rail and road. with rail being 20% cheaper.
Rail's
Yeah.
a capacity though, Grant. That's the problem. It's supply and demand. And
What's that?
Kiwi Rail are a wholesaler, not a retailer. And it's capacity. So we'd love to use more rail, but we can't get capacity.
Yeah. So that's the thing is, it's, you know, how do we have trucks? How do we have trains going in the middle of the night because they don't have a comparable service to the road services that go overnight?
I mean, we would be the ideal candidate for more rail services. We have the rail head coming into our yard, but we can still only get 2 shunts of 8 wagons a day, no matter how much we want to pay for it.
Yeah, and so it's just, it's broken.
Yeah, I mean, there's huge incentives for us to build our new DC in Hamilton on the railhead and move out to Bunnythorpe and Palmerston North for the railhead, but without Kiwi Rail committing the capacity, it's still quicker and easier on road.
Well, it's still fast on the road too, and there's a whole sector of industry where you're dealing with like express package that you're never ever going to compete with customers on rail because rail is just too slow, and they rely like pharmaceuticals, fast moving goods and perishables. They all have to be there next day in North Island, and you cannot get consistency out of rail.
Well, and that's the problem as well. We need FMCG to be there next day. Really, you want probably a midnight cut-off for rail and the train going out of Palmy at sort of getting there at 8 in the morning. There's just not a rail service that meets the needs.
I think that this is a really important discussion to bring this detail. I mean, I'm not trying to stop the discussion. I just want to say that it's actually really important that this detail is drawn out, because in the ERP, the 10-year rail plan and the investment that represents is almost treated as a bit of a panacea. And I think that bringing this, the operational reality and the commercial difficulties you guys are facing in terms of creating that mode shift in practice is going to be a really important lens that we can provide.
If you take that a step further and put that to coastal shipping as well. So we road stuff where we could coastal ship because just the delays of the port and the capacity, there's one ship.
Yeah, I think it's hopefully a short-term problem. We use international lines to do coastal shipping as well, which because of the international disruption at the moment, it's caused a lot of problem across the network. But yeah, coastal, if we had a second ship doing domestic only coastal work, it would get used in a heartbeat, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, would soak it up pretty quick.
Yeah.
If I can just add in that to that point, I think what was really clear to me as I read through the document, the ERP document, is that there's a massive imbalance there in terms of how much they've got in terms of that national rail plan over the next 10 years and that level of investment compared to 30 odd million to investigate stuff for coastal shipping. Like it's such a huge imbalance between what they're doing there. And actually, I mean, as the modelling showed, coastal shipping, if we could get that humming properly, has the biggest opportunity to reduce emissions. So it just seems crazy that there's not more emphasis being put on that.
Thanks,
And it's really, and it's imbalanced.
It's the problem. Trains are a message people understand. Coastal shipping isn't really.
So if we were to, with all these details, operational details, if we were to summarize into a one recommendation from SBC, would it be something around the fact that the barriers, so they set up targets, or they want to set up targets for mode shift, but actually understanding what the barriers are and whether those targets are achievable, that analysis is missing?
I think I fully understand.
You need an integrated design for all of this that says, okay, if rail might be the right price and the maximum capacity at the moment, but we need to be in a position where rail is cheaper. So if road is too cheap, we need to put up the road user charges, or do something to make road more expensive. Not that I want to publicly say that, but there's got to be the financial incentive to get people to do the right thing.
Okay, so that's essentially what we're getting is we need to understand the barriers, and we need an integrated, based on that, we need an integrated design of solutions.
Yeah.
But I think they fully understand the demand profile across the different modes and how people can move their goods and what the incentives are to move some of your production facilities to different areas. So, we have a production facility in the Waikato. At the moment, that's being trucked up to Auckland and then put on a ship to go down to Christchurch. That's an easy win for rail to open up that capacity on coastal shipping to move other goods or to take that out to Tauranga if there was a decent rail head out there. So it's about how all your manufacturers as well fit into that.
So perhaps here we need to really encourage them when they're doing in the supply and freight goodness me, that's a Freudian slip, in the supply and freight strategy that they're going to do, that we need to, our recommendation is to really draw out the importance of understanding the demand and capacity available, and maybe just highlight the risk that exists at the moment that they're going to try and shoehorn that freight and supply chain strategy into what they already have in the rail plan. You know, that's one of the biggest risks I think they've got, is they're saying this is the rail plan, and they're going to try and shape the freight and supply chain study to make it fit that, because they're not going to want to back down on that.
I think for me, Rosie, I think and apologies for being a bit late. I think it's probably, if there were two things in this that would summarise it for me, it's really hammering home the fact that the work on the strategy has to focus on integration, because that's the key bit, and that's the bit that's missing. And I think you're right. If it's kind of taken that rail, well, we've done that bit of it, what about the rest? Then that strategy is going to fail, because it's about the opportunities that mode integration bring. But I do think the other point, and somebody much smarter than me can wordsmith it, is frankly sort rail out. The investment's great, but right now, Graham's hit the nail on the head, whether it's pricing or whether it's service right now, and there's loads of reasons for it. The concept of it is great, but right now it ain't working. And I think Graham hit the nail on the head. It's a conflicted drive to provide a sustainable solution compared to a drive for making a state-owned enterprise profitable. Pick one. That would be my summary.
Well put, John. Well put, as always. We can certainly shape something along those lines in this part of the submission.
But I've always wondered, if I got a video camera and videotape top of the Bombay Hills, all the trucks coming over, for one night, how many of those are going into Palmerston North the next morning? I bet you're going to have 50 or 60. John, do you reckon that's a fair number, or am I too low?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, if you dial into the police walkie-talkie checkpoint, Graham, you get the number, I think.
Yeah. But, they just go from Auckland to Palmy every night, fleet of trucks. They should be on rail.
Very good. Conscious of time, and I see Karina has at least one more slide left. So shall we round off the presentation part, and then we can
that's fine.
discussion?
It's great to see the discussion flowing as we go.
Sorry, can I just add an aviation perspective? I didn't want to interrupt all of the other freight conversation.
No,
it's Jenny
please,
Sullivan.
Jenny, please go ahead.
In New Zealand. At a high level, it's great to see the biofuels mandate there, but it would be fantastic to use this as an opportunity to refine it further. So supportive of the mandate, but it probably does need to be accompanied by policy that incentivizes production for the hardest to abate sectors. At the moment, as the ERP is drafted, it has biofuels being produced for just everyday runabout vehicles, which have viable decarbonisation solutions, whereas aviation and heavy freight should have first access to any biofuels that are produced.
Yep.
And we see that as an overriding principle that should sit behind the biofuels mandate and help the policy design. As we look at the aviation piece there, I'm sure you're across this, but when we talk about investigating SAF feasibility, that's investigating SAF feasibility production within New Zealand. And something like that would need to be complemented by a SAF specific mandate. And that kind of ties into what I was just saying about that overriding biofuels mandate principle. I'd also add in aviation, there's really strong industry support for a public-private advisory body. This is similar to what we're seeing in the US, in the UK, in Norway, for example. You need to have that public-private presence in order to put in place the policy that is required. And then lastly, really just as a point of something that I'm not really seeing come through in the ERP, aviation does play in the freight space, yes, as a percentage of total volume. We're tiny, I think it's around 1%, but when you look at it as a percentage of value, I think it sits around 17%. So aviation has a really specific role in freight. And that's for highly perishable goods or goods with a need for speed, and that is within the domestic network. So that piece is really just flagging that we play in the freight space too. The goals that you talk about, we have a net zero 2050 aspiration, and I believe that aligns with the wider freight aspiration. So just trying to get some recognition of aviation freight in our discussion. That's all I had.
Thank you, Jenny. All really important points, and thank you for coming in. I actually had a question, if I can put you on the spot. Sorry about that. About the biofuels mandate and the role of sustainable aviation fuel, because I know that you will obviously be a lot closer to how this is unfolded than we are. Because I understood around the time that the biofuels mandate was put out for consultation that there was some concern that there was no specific part of the mandate for sustainable aviation fuel. And my question would be, has that ship sailed in terms of carving out a mandate specifically for SAF, or is there still scope, do you think, from an advocacy perspective to have another go at that and see if that can be carved out?
Oh, look, there's absolutely scope for it to be recognised and carved out, still, and we will be pushing for it, both in the ERP and our submission, but more widely in all of our advocacy. And if this public-private body, which we talk to, is stood up, and there is a lot of work going on to get that stood up, that will be a forum that will also be pushing for it. And the reason that we raise this is because the European experience and the experience coming out of the US is without specific policy for SAF production. It doesn't get made because sadly it's more expensive to produce than biodiesel. So without suitable policy, it just wouldn't be produced. In Europe, they've been around long enough with these things to have realised that and to have put in place safeguards. So we're using that experience to inform our policy suggestions here.
That's great. That's really helpful. If you have anything written that you can share with us so that we can pick up on that, would be really grateful to see that as well. And I know that we do have other representatives of the aviation sector on the call, so if anyone else wants to chip in on this, you'd be more than welcome to be part of the discussion too.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just carry on? Oh, Carol.
Oh, sorry, just very quickly. We're also supportive of the need for policies and regulation to support zero emission aircraft. That's obviously critical, and we'll be supporting that in our submission as well.
Jenny, I just had a follow-up question on the biofuel mandate. Sorry, this slide was about what you agree with, and I'm going to what you recommend, and I think a few points that you raised are here. Maybe this is going to specific, so just since we're talking about aviation, it's right at the bottom of the slide. Would you agree of making reference to some of the specific mandate targets, for example, in the roadmap, in the SAF roadmap? I think it's 2.5% in 2025, going to 50% 2050. There's also specific recommendations in terms of policy to support SAF production in New Zealand. Can we make reference to the SAF roadmap for specific suggestions, or would you like the message to be a bit more high level and you develop it in your own submission?
Look, I'm going to come to you with my comments on the submission. I think you've asked for comments by Monday. Perhaps in that I can consider the point and have a stab, and we can take it offline.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Thanks, Jenny.
Well, this is a natural transition to the last slide, and this is about recommendations for freight. I think some of these we've already talked about, but let's get through them. Unless somebody else would like to make a specific point, because I'm aware we only have 10 minutes in the workshop left.
I think we're running till 4:30 on this one, Karina.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So on the emissions reduction target, I just wanted to get a consensus that you all agree to propose a much more ambitious target for freight, which is 50% by 2030 and then 0 by 25 rather than just 25% by 2035 in terms of emissions reductions. You can now also provide feedback in the document, but if you disagree, let me know now, otherwise in the document. Okay, so the freight and supply chain strategy, we talked about this previously, but I think what you'd also like to say is to accelerate the development of the strategy. The way it's framed is develop the strategy in the first current budget and then consider the actions subsequently, which you might find that it's a bit too slow. And some of the recommendations from the low carbon freight pathway, you recommend, you would like to see them better reflected, more explicitly reflected in strategy. And these are about things that already can be done. So it's not looking for new technologies or waiting for them to come, optimizing freight routes, improved data gathering, changing consumer behavior. On alternative fuels, I think it would be good to have a discussion about this because it's not, it's quite high level in my view anyway. So what you're saying is, you recommend targeted support for innovation in domestic biofuel production. Within the bioeconomy context, when it comes to biofuels, there needs to be an analysis undertaken of the end-to-end supply chain for biofuels. Issues like compatibility with current infrastructure or feedstock that might be required in the production of advanced biofuels like hydrogen, so things like that. This is a point that was raised in the first workshop on October 19. So if that person is here, it'd be good to elaborate on that point. And also, you recommend to explicitly investigate the role of hydrogen. I think what my impression is that the way the ERP is framed is there's quite a bit of discussion around electrification, battery electrification and biofuels, but not so much about hydrogen. And also,
do we need to go more broadly rather than investigate the role of hydrogen? I think, my desire would be to have the subsidisation of the purchase price of hydrogen for early adopters at the long run price. It's kind of like, it's such a good option, and if we could have the future price now, everyone would go, great, hydrogen's the solution. But everyone's saying, oh, we'll only get to the future price once we get to the volume that we need, and it's kind of a circular argument. And I think that's the unlock for hydrogen from my perspective, from the business case we've done.
Great, thanks, Graham. And I see Tom from the warehouse is coming supporting that. And I know there are others on the call, particularly from the freight group, who've been actively involved in hydrogen. So anyone who has a view on this and how, because this is a section we would really love to draw out and make a lot stronger. We would really appreciate your insights and expertise on how we might do that. So totally welcome this discussion.
Can we maybe just think about, I think it's a really great point. Just think about this in terms of from a fleet replacement perspective. So the comment that hydrogen at the long run price now makes sense. That would make sense in terms of as your fleet is coming up for replacement, not as your complete swap out. And I think that the role of that, to continue that the concept that we talked earlier around the integrated thinking, that there's still the role of the transition fuel for the fleet that's still in play, like the existing conventional diesel fleet that's in play to achieve the emission reductions in the near term. I think just thinking about those two in harmony with each other is really important, that it's not one or the other, that we're...
That's a good point, Rosie.
I think I'd really like to double down on that. The work that was done previously around, we see the future pathways, optimization, transitional fuels, and then electric, and probably fuel cell electric is kind of the pathway we set out before. And I think that's a really, we should keep saying that again and again and again, so people think about that approach. You bang on, Rosie. I assume that was Rosie then. It sounded like you, I think.
Yeah, it was me. And yeah, it's a really good point. Keep coming back to the work we've already done, and we should keep referencing that document, that pathway, and include the link in those sentences, include the link so they can always go and click on it and keep them coming back to it. So yeah, it's a really great point.
Yeah, absolutely. We will be doing that, and doubling down on both the targets, like as you see here, Karina's got the 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050, which the pathway has shown is feasible. It will be tricky, but it's feasible. And also on the specific aspects of the pathway, the horizons, I think we called them. And I think linking through to the document is a great idea, Rosie, and we also want to use that as a bit of a case study showcase for, what can be done when the sector works together. So I think that don't worry, we will make sure that that's clear. And those are really useful for points about how we might emphasize what needs to be done to support that hydrogen pathway.
And you could add on there that aviation will be a future consumer of green hydrogen as well. We now have a relationship with Airbus, who are working on essentially next generation zero emission aircraft, which will likely be hydrogen fuel cell aircraft for say up to 100 passengers around probably 2035. But that will rely on a source of scalable green hydrogen. So we will be an end consumer of green hydrogen produced in New Zealand as well.
Great, thanks, Jenny. That's a really helpful point. Is there anything else anyone wants to add on the hydrogen piece? I see Rosie's asked a question on congestion charging in the chat. Before we move to that, should we round out this hydrogen piece, or people feel like we've talked enough about that?
Is there a point to be made as well around the relationship with the electricity, just as there is for the battery electric, for hydrogen, if there is importance for it to be domestically produced or for it to be green hydrogen?
Karina, I kind of want a related point. The only last thing, and to respond to Kate's query as to whether there's anything else. One thing I found quite interesting in the document is that the hydrogen really shows up in the industry, energy and industry sector aspects, and very little in the transport. And I think it's really important for us to make sure that they look at those two, make sure that they don't let hydrogen for transport get lost in that energy sector part, because the production of the hydrogen is one thing, but establishing the vehicles and the refueling infrastructure needs to be there as well. And I don't know whether anyone else picked up on that, but I mean, even if you, like, because I did a, control F on hydrogen, and the majority of it was coming up in the energy and industry aspects. So I did control F that out and make sure that doesn't get lost.
I had the same observation, and then also the Ministry of Transport document about hydrogen. Hydrogen's mentioned 3 times.
Yeah.
And a 50-page document about one of the recent pieces, and you sit there and you go, it's not on the radar.
Yeah.
I think, Rosie, I think that that's, oh, sorry. Go.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, at the session that that Kate set up earlier this week, transport was a really big part of that conversation with the energy sector. So I think it's just making sure that we, and thinking about, what Air New Zealand are doing, and what Jenny, I think it was you just mentioning, the quantity, like the volume of supply that transport will need in the future needs to come from the energy sector. There's no doubt about it. So let's just make sure that they don't lose sight of us being a major consumer of that energy sector.
Yeah, I think that's dead right, Rosie. And I think that what you and Graham have found through your searching of the document is a product of these different parts of the ERP discussion document having been produced by different public sector agencies, and left hand not necessarily talking to the right on some of this stuff. And what we've been advocating from, you know, the commission process onward is, you know, the energy transition is the transport transition, is the infrastructure transition, right? They all need to sit together and work together and speak to one another. And we're not yet seeing that, so it's something we need to keep pushing, and we need to keep joining the dots, including on how, you know, to draw that hydrogen content from the energy and industry piece through to the implications for transport and vice versa, to be honest. Claire, I see you've got your hand up.
Hello, Claire from Christchurch Airport here. Just thinking about, I think it would be really useful if there was a bit more on the demand side of the volume required in relation to hydrogen. I'm thinking of a call I had last week with Hamburg Airport around how much hydrogen they were planning on needing by 2050, and it was 45,000 tons of hydrogen, and it's just massive, right? And having a call with Air New Zealand, which Jenny would know much more details about, but about a month ago they were saying to convert their ATR fleet would require an extra 10% of New Zealand's energy load, and I don't think it's really appreciated just how much energy is required there. So if we could start having a pathway that includes volumes, so that the energy side can see what transport's going to need. In that sense, it would be really helpful.
Great, thanks, Claire. Great point.
Salivate on the idea of Te Wai Point turning into a huge hydrogen facility.
Yep, yeah, I vote for that.
We'll put it in there, see what happens. Great, thanks, Claire. Any other points on hydrogen? I'm not seeing any. What do you want to do now, Karina? Do you feel you're finished with this part of the presentation, or can we move to just general discussion?
Yeah, I'm done with the slides. There's a question from Rosie on the congestion charge, though, that I wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, Rosie, what did you want to speak to the congestion charging point?
Well, had you guys talked about it at all yet?
Only insofar as we say that you agree with the congestion charge in principle.
Do we have? I mean, I read through it and I couldn't find any detail about what exactly is being proposed. Is that detailed somewhere else? Like, is that confined to a particular location? Is it going to include trucks that need to go through the city? Like, where's the detail on it? I'm a bit nervous about it, given that we're there's a lot of freight that moves through Auckland.
There isn't any detail on it. I mean, the most recent detailed government thinking will be in the green paper that was released back in June. But obviously they've taken that and they're working on it in the background, and there's some high level representation of it in this document, but it's not the full picture. So we know that there is policy being worked on in the background that is not reflected in the discussion document.
Yeah.
We
does anyone know? Is it including post and countdown, or your
we sorry, Sam here. Hi everyone. From New Zealand Post. We submitted as part of the select committee process, or whatever process it was, on the green paper, around saying they could use it as a tool to incentivize low emissions transport and electric vehicles and the like, either having a lower pricing or be exempt from the pricing. So maybe it's more a case of introduce congestion pricing in a way that incentivizes cleaner transport, or as opposed to just a simple charge across all types of vehicles.
Yeah, that's a really good approach. I gathered what I read when I was reading between the lines, I got the impression they were trying to stop people driving into the city in their private cars and encourage people to use public transport. But freight doesn't have that flexibility. Like, freight can't use public transport or cycle.
No, but we could incentivize freight that's in a low emission mode. So.
Sam, did you say that you did a submission along those lines to the green paper?
Yeah.
Could you share that with us, and then we can potentially pick up on some of those points?
Oh yeah, I'll dig it out.
Cool, thanks.
I think the thing with congestion and what they were getting at was around more around getting the cars off the road, because when you're talking the trucks, yes, you can't get the trucks off the road, like going into town, etc. You've got trucks that are just sitting idle because they're stuck in traffic. Like you go down Nielsen Street and only hung any day at 4 o'clock, and you just sit there gridlocked and they're just burning diesel, creating a whole pile of emission instead of getting to the destination. That is part of the issue. Is if you get cars off the road, the trucks will do less emissions and get to destinations faster.
Yeah, and so would others in the group here be comfortable with us, rather than just having a blanket introduce congestion pricing, having a bit more detail around that, so acknowledging the role of freight and incentivize low emission freight as part of that if they're going to be including freight. I mean, I'm coming at it from selfishly our perspective, so I certainly don't want to sway what the group says, but I'm curious as to whether other members feel a bit of concern around the risk that congestion charge pricing becomes blanket.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Rosie. So we can open it up. I see that Toby, aka Kate Wilson Butler, has his hand up. Toby, would you like to make a point on this one?
Yeah, I think the idea here is that we should frame what you think congestion pricing should mean in the context of heavy freight, and say, look, knock yourself out in terms of keeping private vehicles out of the city, but allow freight through. I mean, that would be the answer, isn't it? To actually put in the detail they haven't put in.
I agree, Toby. I think there are several dot points around these actions to deliver on these recommendations where we just need to call out that, similar to the New Zealand's rail strategy, I think, and things around mode shift and consumer buying behaviour, I think we need to call out that there's further work that needs to be done, similar along the lines of, the EV transition working group or whatever they're called. I think that while we support what's in here, there's, the devil's going to be in the details. So we just need to, call out that we need further work here and further narrative to sort of nuance the solution.
Great, thanks, Tom. I see Bevan's got his hand up.
I just wanted to expand on Mike's point there. You say that, you've got your trucks sitting there idle because the cars are congesting the roads. But one thing I think we should look at for this is the role the council plays. We actually end up congesting ourselves between our own industry. So if you look at your couriers, Mike, just in your company and your competitors, same with me. We're all driving around the CBDs, all looking for the same parking spots, all looking to deliver our consumer goods in the same way. So if there was a more, if you take the air traffic control system and apply that to how we utilize those roads and get smarter that way, you'll reduce congestion in that. Because why am I trying to park my truck in the viaduct at 9 o'clock on Monday morning along with everybody else in my industry? If you had bookable spaces, or we can plan, airlines can plan code sharing between seats and coordinate different airlines coming in, and transport operators can share loads. Why can't we share the spaces more smartly as well?
Great, very good point. Thank you. Michael, I'll pass to you.
I was just while you all were talking, I was having a quick look at the MOT green paper. I think it is green paper, because I was trying to recall the details of it, and I think they're very much in the mode of investigation at the moment. So I think that's in line with what you're proposing there is actually underway, and it's very much around, I think, an interesting point around sort of the rebound effects from investment into public transport and walking and cycling, as essentially could induce more vehicle traffic. So it's sort of part of that holistic view. So I think sort of the ministry is thinking the same way, would be what I would say.
It's good to know. Thank you for that background. Bevan, was there another point that you wanted to make? You still got your hand up, or was that a relic? Cool. Any other thoughts on the role of congestion charging, or what we might be able to usefully say to add some nuance to the high level content in the document? No? Maybe not. I wondered if, because we've talked quite a bit about freight on the call today, which is great. I would open it up to any further comments that relate to the freight section of the ERP. And if there isn't any, maybe we could spend a little more time talking about the other two focus areas, which relate really to mode shift and to accelerating the light fleet transition. So opening it up now for any more discussion on the freight piece. I'm not seeing any hands. I mean, that says that we've got it about right, which is good, subject to the comments that have been made. And obviously there's a lot to go on in terms of the low carbon freight pathway. There is a huge amount of work that has gone into that. So we have much to draw from happily. The key now is to get the government to make policy that's consistent with it. John, I see that you had your hand raised for a brief moment and now it's gone down again. Did you want to make a point?
No, I was being very selfish. I wondered if there was a point that I missed earlier, because I just had an urgent call come in, and I know that we talked about congestion charging, but maybe we take that offline.
Well, yeah, we've had a bit of a chat about congestion charging and whether freight might be exempted from that, or at least low emissions freight, and on what basis we might recommend that they put some detail around the congestion charging idea.
Great. I think more carrot, less stick would be my summary.
Very good, noted. Karina, I wondered if there were any specific questions that you wanted to ask the group on the other two focus areas, or is it worth flashing up the areas where the specific recommendations that we have made for any additional discussion?
I've actually gone through all of the key points I wanted to talk about. I've went through in the slides, Kate, and I got reactions to them, good notes, so I'm pretty happy. Let me just double check. I tried to be as comprehensive as I could. I think one thing to raise with the group is we wanted to include some numbers in the submission. You know, specific projects can deliver this amount of emissions reduction at this cost, and have and help kind of the government understand that the gap, because they are saying there is, even with the ERP actions, we're still missing the targets. So if we could help identify specific areas where investment here can deliver that much emissions, and then therefore reduce the gap. There is a table in the document for the air industry specifically, but if you've got anything to add to that as part of other parts of transport, that would be useful. So specific actions that you would like them to include, or projects that they would like them to include in the plan, because so far it's mainly around policy and regulations.
Sam here. I don't know if this is, sorry, I'll just keep dropping off as well. Sorry, was your question in regards to freight or any aspect?
Any, so
okay,
including
cool.
freight, please. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things was I saw some reference to corporate fleet charging, especially at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if that could be strengthened, or we could ask something a lot more specific, because that for us, and talking to a number of other corporates, is quite a significant barrier to the use of electric vehicles in our fleet. Probably not at the larger scale, obviously, but for those with cars and light commercial vehicles, the work safe regulations and some of the other requirements make it quite prohibitive.
Yeah, I think we. Oh, sorry, Sam. Don't want to cut you
Yeah,
off.
there was a mention of it, but I was just wondering if we could be a bit more kind of stronger.
Do you have any specific? Any specific recommendations on that, or what can be done? Policy? Or we can chat about this
in terms of drawing it out, it was more about really pointing out that it is a barrier, a significant barrier for a lot of us implementing EVs in corporates. In terms of a solution, I think it's about probably moving faster. I feel like WorkSafe and others, you know, they're quite far behind the technology in terms of its safety and so on. And so if they can kind of accelerate their work and being practical yet obviously keeping in mind health and safety around what is suitable and when we can start to use home charging for business vehicles at home.
Yeah, I think that idea originally came, it was in our MOT submission, yes. And I think it actually originally came from IAG, so it's a shame Jess Roger has dropped off the call because I think they're facing similar issues. Yeah, so it would be really great for those, I don't know if any other members are on the call who have large fleets or looking to transition their fleets and are facing similar issues, but I think it would be really good to strengthen it and put some detail around it, like you say, Sam. Yeah. So maybe Karina, we could follow up separately with IAG and see if they've got any more detail they want to add to.
And the other one is, and apologies, you might have discussed this or it might even be out of scope, I could have misread it, is the clean car discount rebate and expanding that or raising it slightly for light commercial vans, because light commercial vans in the workforce obviously are replacing diesel vans, and you get about 5 times the carbon benefit of replacing a diesel van with an EV over replacing your household car with an EV. So if they just raise the threshold a bit, then you'd probably be able to capture a lot of the electric vans that are likely to come into the country over the next 12 months and help them bring that total cost of ownership down.
Thanks, Sam. Is there anyone on the call who's got any further thoughts on that or any views on the clean car discount in general?
I was just wondering, what do you mean by raising the threshold on the clean cars?
So it's 80,000 for passenger cars at the moment, and maybe if you raise it to 90, 95,
right.
90
right,
or 95,000, yep. Just for vans, not for cars, then that may capture what's coming in.
Thanks, Sam. Did you want to say anything else on that one, Jackson?
Well, I mean, I would just add that, on the consumer side, that might be a good idea. But you know, if you look at the clean car standard side of it, there's definitely still incentives for vehicles priced over $80,000 to bring an efficient model. So I mean, it is included, but yeah, I mean, from a customer's perspective, hiring the threshold for vans seems like a reasonable suggestion.
Great, thank you. On the light fleet, I mean, they've included the target of increasing zero emissions vehicles to 30% of the light fleet by 2035. And they've asked specifically for comment on that. I don't know if anyone, I mean, we've broadly said we think that's okay, but we'll be absolutely guided by members as to how achievable that is in practice and how that squares with business plans. I wondered if there was any specific comment on that target. Mike.
Yeah, the issue you've got at the moment is with the light electric vehicles for commercial, they're not at the standard required that we have for the diesel vehicles. So they're not par on par. You can't carry the same type of loads. They don't have the same type of cubic capacity. We're not there yet. So to try to encourage people into them, it needs to be par on par. And also the point that Sam raised as well is that the rebate's not enough. The cost of the EV versus the diesel vehicles are streets apart, and it's not enough to encourage people to move across. So that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, exactly. And the question is, how far do we want to go in this particular submission on suggesting specific additional measures the government might consider to accelerate that transition? I know that they're thinking about things, and the Clean Car Sector Leadership Group is thinking about things like scrappage schemes, and we've addressed that in the submission. Is there anything you think we've missed in terms of incentives or other levers the government might pull?
It would probably be more around having a group-wide buying scheme to try to get better buying power into New Zealand, given that New Zealand, I mean, for vehicles makes up 0.18%, I think it is, of the world's production. We are a very small fish when it comes to vehicles in New Zealand, and to get a better pricing to make it more lucrative to change people over, that's got to be a consideration.
Yeah, very important point. And would this has come up time and again, and the question is, how do you operationalize that, right? Like, how do you bring together, we talk about corporate buyers clubs and things like that. So in the spirit of taking these ideas and putting them into the realm of practical action, I would welcome your industry perspective on what that actually might look like and what steps we might take to make that happen.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to come up with a bit of an industry group to look at it and go, well, as an industry, this is where we need to move to, and how we're going to get there, and that'll come down to vehicle specification and price. They'll be two of the key drivers to make it work for us. Yeah,
and I suppose the other side of the coin of that question is the supply, right? Are enough electric vehicles suitable for use in New Zealand actually being produced?
Yes.
Quite separately from our purchasing power.
Yes.
Yeah. Not quite sure how we're going to pick that one. Any insights there? Most welcome.
Yeah, I think its supply will be an issue. When you get the right type of vehicle at the right price, it will then be, can we get enough? Because you'll suddenly get an avalanche of people trying to get on board with it. But again, little old New Zealand, 0.18% of the world supply. How many vehicles are we going to get? Yeah. We might need to tack ourselves back onto Australia, partner with them, maybe something like that as a broader idea.
Yeah, that might be interesting and worth noting. Rosie, I see you've got your hand up now. Oh, sorry. I might go to Rosie and then Jackson, if that's okay. Rosie, you may still be on mute.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said me afterwards. So, I mean, look, I'm not from the industry, and so I don't understand where they got the 35% from. But for our organisation and many, we're big organisations with hundreds of staff, and others on the call have thousands of staff who come from all different parts of the societal spectrum in New Zealand, and this increasing the electric car fleet 35% has, if that becomes a target that creates financial constraints on, a number of different parts of our society, and many of them will be, some of the lower paid staff members within our organisations. I think that it's really important that we're looking out for, our broader staff family as we respond to these things. And I just think that target in isolation is such a massive risk when you've got these other ideas that they want to do around, whether it's the congestion charging and encouraging more use of public transport. But none of that can be done if it ends up further marginalising some of those parts of our community. And I just wonder whether there's a risk around this 35% target that will leave some of us with, like we've got staff from, who travel more than an hour to get to the port to work each day. And that's pretty massive for them. And so there's not really a lot of options for them for how they're going to get around. And I think, so I just wonder whether we need to give some thought to, instead of just saying that we support this, make sure it's looked at in terms of what's the outcome that they're trying to achieve. Like if they manage to increase car share by 50%, then do they need to have the 35% target? Like they should be looking at the overall outcome that they're trying to achieve, and those things in, when they're overlaid on top of each other, should all contribute to that outcome, but not necessarily pose a risk to some of those parts of our communities, not even just our staff members, but just the whole New Zealand population. So I just wonder whether we need to make sure that we're thinking not just from our organisation's perspective, but from the staff within our organisations as well.
I think that's dead right, Rosie, and that's exactly why we landed on that headline recommendation of trying to develop a roadmap that views these issues holistically, because it's about supply, it's about buying power, it's about whether the infrastructure will be in place, and it's also about accessibility and affordability. And it's a shame that Louise from Akina Foundation has just had to drop off the call, because she is engaged with the Clean Car Sector Leadership Group exactly with that purpose, to make sure that angle is brought to the transition. And the risk, I think, of pursuing policies in isolation, exactly as you said, is that you don't address the whole. So yeah, point well made, and we'll absolutely be registering that in the
that's good. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jackson, over to you.
Yeah, just a couple of points. So one on the grouped purchasing power. So yep, it's a good idea under an economy with variable production. So if there was extra resources and we could, and our suppliers could produce additional EVs, then yep, that would work. But right now it's highest price gets allocation, right? So any added volume or purchasing power won't actually help us get a lowered price. The only thing that importers can do at the moment is effectively remove safety specifications, which comes at its own cost, right? So these are some of the things that we're trying to weigh up or balance as we look at our allocation planning for future years. And on the 30% target, yeah, it's a difficult one, right? Because it's so far out. There's a lot of uncertainty. I guess from our perspective, whether it's achievable or not, I mean, it's going to be there or thereabouts. But for us, I guess our main target is the CO2 targets, right? It's not about any numbers of vehicles or units. It's overall CO2 that we're aiming for. So yeah, I wonder if it's, we don't know what the perverse outcomes of a target like that might be. But yeah, I mean, we can't, I couldn't comment on the feasibility of it. Yeah, I guess that's our stance right now. But whether it's the right target or not, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think those are really good points. I mean, bring it together with Rosie's points. It's about what's your end objective, and if the overall objective is actual reduction of emissions, looking at the CO2 and understanding that it's not entirely clear from an industry perspective how feasible that target will be yet. If that sums up the message correctly.
Yep.
Great. Toby, did you want to, it's very unnerving having you with my name, Toby, I have to admit. Did you want to say something? No. Great. Was there anything else on, I suppose, light fleet issues generally? We've talked a little bit about the target. We've talked a bit about developing a holistic roadmap. There might be other points that people want to make. Or people might just want us to wrap up so they get a couple of minutes of their life back. That's fine too. So I'll pass quickly to Karina and Toby to see if there's anything else that you had hoped would be discussed today that we haven't covered.
I don't have anything else to add, Kate. No,
okay. Toby, nothing from your
perspective? No, it's been a very useful and informative discussion.
Fantastic, I agree. So if there isn't anything else, thank you to all of you for taking time out of your exceedingly busy days, and thanks to those who weren't able to stay with us the whole time as well. That was incredibly useful from my perspective. I think it's clear that there is a real richness and detail of commercial reality and industry insight that we can bring to bear through this submission, and so I really look forward to working to shape it into something that is really impactful and has concrete ideas that the government can take and do something with to make policy that is going to be enduring and workable. So thanks all for your time, especially so late on a Friday afternoon. Wishing you all a wonderful weekend and look forward to being in touch again soon. Take care.
Fabulous work, Kate.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rosie. See ya.
Karina. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.